Welcome in, everybody. It is Tuesday, October 15th. Indiana is coming off of a bye week, heading into a huge homecoming showdown against Nebraska this Saturday on big noon kickoff. Peegs.com's Matt Weaver, Jared Kelly here, talking through the bye week and then looking ahead to Nebraska. And then as well, we have a mailbag this week because of the bye week. So you folks asked us questions over on Peegs.com's our football VIP board, so we will get to those as many as we can later in the show as well. But first, Matt, did want to start with a couple notable things from Kurt Cignetti's Monday press conference. The most notable of which is obviously Jalen Walker, starting linebacker. He was banged up in the Northwestern game, did not play the entire second half. Wasn't too sure how his, well, we don't know what the injury is, but wasn't sure how he would kind of progress through this bye week. But it looks like, based on Cignetti's comments, he should be full speed for Saturday. And just having him back along with Aiden Fisher against the Nebraska offense should be huge for Indiana.
Yeah, I know you were up there for the game. I think one of the was it McCall Kamara. I mean, you take it for what it's worth, but I think he said after the game he thought he'd be fine.
Yeah.
And I think Signetti had even said in the past to James Madison, there have been times where they thought he might be out and he comes back. So, obviously having a bye week is huge. You wonder if he would have been able to play if the Nebraska game was this past Saturday instead of this upcoming Saturday. But he's obviously a huge part of their defense. He's one of those defensive leaders for him at linebacker. Him and Aiden Fisher, and just been a terrific player for Indiana all season. So, and against a team like Nebraska, who's going to have obviously some guys, some athletes, a quarterback who can move around, having that kind of speed on the field. At linebacker, and I thought Isaiah Jones and Rolajar Hardy did a solid job, but obviously it's not the same. I mean, you're talking about a guy who's played a ton of football, not only at Indiana this year, but in his past. So, getting him back and having him, I don't know if anybody's 100% even at 6 games of the season, but having him back to the point where he's good enough to play and be out there is definitely very beneficial for IU.
Yeah, and we know how much of a premium this staff plays on puts on playing their starters heavy snaps. So having him back with alongside Aiden Fisher will be huge. And then Dylan Raiola, Nebraska's a freshman quarterback, is not too much of a runner, so that should help in that regard. Even if Walker isn't fully healthy just yet, it won't be the same as that Northwestern game with Jack Lausch and what he did on the ground, obviously as well. So but Raiola can run a little bit, so we'll see how that ultimately shakes out. And then if Walker isn't 100%, having Isaiah Jones and Elijah Hardy there will be is important as well, just for depth purposes as well. The other thing to come out of yesterday, I believe it was, Indiana announced its second sellout of the season.
Michigan against Michigan.
Right, the Michigan game. We still don't know yet about Washington. It looks like they're still selling tickets for that Washington game. We'll see if that ends up being a sellout. If they beat Nebraska, you'd have to feel pretty good about Indiana at least getting close to a sellout, if not a sellout for that Washington game. But obviously, we'll see. And then Michigan always travels well, so I'm guessing a portion of those tickets for that sellout are for Michigan fans as well. But we'll obviously see for that one. Matt, two sellouts in one season, though. It happened in 2021 with the Cincinnati and Ohio State games, and we know how that season went, obviously. But to see the fans finally kind of, buying into what Cignetti has put on the field this season, it is a good sign. And I think this morning Scott Dolson sent out an email to, all the people who bought tickets and all the fans ahead of this Nebraska game, talking about this is what big time programs do. They fill stadiums, they show up early, they stay late. It is really good to see just Indiana kind of taking off in that regard too.
Yeah, and I mean, people always ask how do you get fans in the stands, and I mean, I've always said it's very simplistic, and but you got to win. I mean, you got to give people a reason to want to be in the stadium instead of being out in the parking lot or the grass lot or whatever, or just at home on their couch. So and having a team that's not only exciting and fun to watch but wins. I mean, we saw it. I mean, Kevin Wilson's teams, especially mainly offensively, were entertaining and fun to watch. But his best seasons were 6-6, and there were some really kind of disappointing and disheartening losses in there. This obviously is a lot different. I mean, you got a team that's playing great on both sides of the ball, and special teams too. I don't, I know Signetti talked about that yesterday. It hasn't been talked about enough, mainly because I think when you're not talking about special teams, it's a good thing. Because usually when you're talking about special teams, they're doing something wrong. So this team has been so sound in all three phases. It hasn't been perfect. It's never going to be, but I Indiana 6-0. They won every game by double digits, and I mean, really, other than Northwestern, every game was, you kind of felt like it was over early to midway through the fourth quarter. And I mean, the Northwestern game, I think it was 17-7. They outscored them in the fourth quarter. So they still went, they still won kind of going away, but they've it's not like years past where you waited for Indiana to make a mistake to lose a game. I always say snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. That's been Indiana football for most of my life. And this team's the other way around. They're not snatching victory from the jaws of defeat because they're usually well in hand, but you feel like even if it's a really close game, they're going to find a way to pull it out.
Yeah, and that was one of the things I remember writing about in the offseason, preseason as well is, not only does Indiana need to win to kind of fill these seats, but just put a fun product on the field, even if, you're not 6-0 like they are right now. Just at least put something on the field that is entertaining to watch. And Indiana has done both things. They've won, and this is a really fun offense and defense to watch as well. And it's a good thing when you don't have to see the punting unit out there too much, which we haven't
Yeah.
seen this season as well. So that's good as well. I did want to talk about the Nebraska game just a little bit here before we get into these mailbag questions, Matt. This is we keep saying this every week, but it feels like every single week is sort of a step up. A new litmus test, excuse me, for Indiana, and this is no different. Nebraska is 25th in the coaches poll this week, 27th, I believe, in the AP poll. So obviously we knew the level of competition would ratchet up here in the second half of the year, which it's gonna come fast and quick for Indiana, but you need these kind of tests to kind of prove yourself. And there's still a lot of people out there I know, especially non-IU fans, who are saying that Indiana hasn't played anybody yet, and you could make that argument. Even with the score differentials, you could still make that argument. But this game, especially if you come out and you really beat down Nebraska like you have these other teams and really show that we can beat top 25 caliber teams, top half of the conference teams. I think that's going to go a long way in sort of, continuing to shift that mindset, not even just around the program, but nationally as well.
Yeah, and obviously with Fox Noon, the big noon kickoff coming, those guys are Urban Meyer and all those guys going to be, I think, out in the South End Zone Plaza, and then the number one Fox team of Joel Klatt and is it Gus Johnson?
Yeah.
Do I have it right? On the game. This is their big game of the week. I mean, this is their number one telecast. So it's not only a chance, for the people who are filling up the stands, but also people who are going to be tuning in to watch Indiana play. To see, and there may be some people out there who haven't had a chance or haven't watched Indiana and are kind of curious to see how good they really are. And it's going to be a good test. I mean, Nebraska's, offensively recently they've struggled a little bit, but defensively they've been playing pretty well. So it'll be a good test on both sides. But I have good athletes. Matt Rule's a heck of a coach. I know last year didn't go great for him, but I never really thought that he wouldn't get that place turned around. He's really good at what he does. The NFL notwithstanding, but a lot of guys have struggled up there. So it's going to be interesting. The quarterback battle, and I know they don't really battle, but you have a guy who's as experienced as you can be in Curtis Rourke, and then you got Dylan Raiola, who is 6 games into his college career, and obviously he looks like a guy who's got a chance to be a future pro and a high draft pick. He is really really talented, but like all freshmen do, he can have some struggles, and so I think that'll be a big key if you can kind of get him out of sync and off rhythm. I think that'll really give Indiana a great chance to get a win in this game.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been kind of surprised how, maybe not surprised is the right word, but just maybe pleasantly surprised that, how quickly Raiola has kind of come into the Big Ten and really showed himself. Because, we've seen with, teams like Michigan State with Aiden Childs, just how much he's struggled. He was a former top recruit as well at quarterback. So for Raiola to come in and really just kind of take over the reins of that offense, and he's done pretty well to lead that offense. He's not going to be perfect. He's only a true freshman, but You could see the obvious arm talent, and then just think when he's a junior, even next year, but especially when he's a junior, just how good he's going to be if he ends up sticking around at Nebraska for 3 years. So it'll definitely be a test. Nebraska's offense is probably the best Indiana has seen this season. Just their combination of being able to run it and throw it. So the defense will be tested, and we'll see how getting guys like Jalen Walker back will ultimately impact things. But like I said, that is obviously a huge return from Indiana from an injury standpoint. And then the defensive line as well. Even those depth pieces, I know they don't play a whole ton, but it would be nice to get back some of those guys. Landino was hurt against Northwestern. He was out. Jadarius Collins been out a couple weeks. So Robbie Harrison as well was out. So it would be nice to get those guys back in the trenches, even if they are just depth pieces as well. Matt, just how are you feeling kind of going in this Nebraska game? Kurt Cignetti has had um, he's had good success with coming off of bye weeks and keeping his team engaged. I figured you figure that's not going to be changed here at Indiana, but there could be a little bit of a lull, maybe in that first quarter, first half type thing as well.
Yeah, I guess there could be. I honestly, I think they're going to come out. I think they're going to come out and play really well. I think he understands how big this game is. I mean, I think he probably felt it was a big game even before you had the sellout, before you found out Fox was going to carry the game, and they were going to send their pregame show to Bloomington. Now that even obviously ratchets it up even a little bit more. I mean, there could be a little bit of rust, but I think this team's going to be really sharp. I think he is going to be I wouldn't be surprised if this week, I'm sure people see some of the interview from the Hoosier Connect Twitter site where he's like, if they're up in a game, he comes in at halftime and you know what I mean. I wouldn't be surprised if this week in practice he's even more of a hard ass than usual. Just because because I'm sure these players have had 2 weeks to kind of read about how great they're doing. How Indiana is the kind of the darling of college football right now, and he's going to make sure that doesn't carry over into the game. And I like a lot of the players won't buy into that because they're older, but you may have some guys where that could seep in a little bit just because they've not, especially maybe guys who were at Indiana last year who aren't used to this kind of success, over the last few years. So I expect them to play well. I really do. I think Nebraska is going to provide a test. I mean, I will say this, and I'm not trying to discount some of Nebraska stats, but I went back and looked at some of the teams they played. I mean, they played a really bad U. Now, Indiana's played some bad teams too, so stats are part of it. But defensively, they played a bad UTEP team. They played an FCS team in Northern Iowa. And then, I know Purdue had that outburst against Illinois, but Purdue has been just atrocious offensively. Rutgers is not a super strong offensive team. And I'm not saying that they don't have a good defense, but just like Indiana, people are going to talk about Indiana stats against mediocre, to poor competition. I think the same's got to be shown for the other side. So it'll be interesting. They are going to have great athletes and they're going to be well coached. I think Indiana's offense is more explosive and more consistent and more efficient than Nebraska's right now, and I think that's why I have them. I think they have the edge over them for this game.
Mhm. Yeah, ESPN's Football Power Index has Indiana with a 76.5% chance to win. The spread right now is -6.5 for Indiana as the favorites. I do like Indiana to cover here, the 6.5. If they win, I think it'll be kind of going away like they've done, finishing the fourth quarter strong here. So I will give, I do give Indiana the edge there. They're just playing so well right now on both sides. So it's kind of one of those things where it's really tough to bet against them. At this point in the year, just with how well they're playing, and just a 6.5 point spread. I mean, you got to win just by one touchdown. Indiana's won by multiple scores every single game this season as well. So we'll see how that goes. All right, Matt. Let's get into mailbag questions here. We have quite a few. I know some of them are recruiting related, so we'll leave that for the end of the podcast, the recruiting questions here, and we'll just kind of go in order based on how they came in. I did want to remind everybody, if you guys haven't yet, over on our Peegs.com football board, you guys can always join. We'd love to have you over there. Always a lot of good football discussion as well. You can find me and Matt over on the board commenting as well. All right, let's get into the first question. This one is from Go IU Hoosiers. What position group has surprised you the most in the 6 games thus far? What group has surprised you the least? I'll take this first one. The group that surprised me the most, I think, is the defensive line. I wasn't, we've seen the past 3 years, just, how much Indiana's, pass rush has struggled to get through and just generating pressure. They returned, Linnell Carr from last year. We thought JMF would play a lot more than he has, but I wasn't completely sold on the idea of Indiana completely turning around its pass rush this year, even with adding Pat Coons and Brian Haynes and Buda Williams. But I've been really really encouraged by how Mikhail Kamara has come in and made an immediate impact. And you see those transfers to the defensive tackle C.J. West, James Carpenter coming. Linnell Carr even has gotten better this year, I think, as well. So I would say for that group, the defensive line as a whole has probably surprised me the most.
Yeah, and I mean, I would agree with that. I think the defensive line, there were some questions. I mean, I thought they had a chance to be pretty good. But yeah, I mean, we wondered how McCall Kamara would translate to this level of football. How James Carpenter, and he had a, maybe a game or two in there where he had a little bit of a rough outing, but I mean, he's really picked it up. You mentioned Linnell Carr has played a lot better. Tyree Tucker has been a really good addition. I know he's not starting, but he's in that rotation and he's played well. And I know Mario Landino was out in against Northwestern, but for a true freshman, he's not getting a ton of snaps. But when he gets in there, they're impactful snaps. He seems to be making something happen. So yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, that was a group where you just kind of wondered, and it's been probably one of the weakest, if not the weakest group for Indiana football the last 3 or 4 seasons. And they've definitely stepped up. And I always say it. I mean, as much as football's changed over the years, the spread and all this stuff, games are still won up front. I mean, the great teams win because they have great offensive lines and they have great defensive lines and they impose their will on their opponents. And all that stuff is great. The quarterbacks and throwing the ball over the place. If you can't protect your quarterback and you can't get after the quarterback, it's really hard to win.
Mm. Yeah, and then probably my second answer there would have been the offensive line. Just how many moving parts Bob Bostad had to kind of work with and put together this offseason, and to see that offensive line come together as well as it has this year. I wouldn't say I'm surprised because Bob Bostad is really really good at what he does. So I wasn't really surprised that he would ultimately get this group working together, in a positive fashion. But just so how quickly it came together, they really haven't missed a beat from game one on. It was like I thought that it might take a few games, 2, 3 games for them to really gel. But aside from that FIU game where they allowed a couple pressures, I mean they've really done a good job of keeping Curtis Rourke on his feet too.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, that was that on the offense. That was a position group we probably had the most questions about. We knew what they had in Kadick and Carter Smith, but then you wondered, and then you lose Kidwell. So a guy that you really felt like was going to be a plug and play guy, you lose them a week or two into fall camp. And I mean, Drew Evans, who started his career at Wisconsin as a walk on, comes to Indiana, has been terrific. Bray Lynch is a guy that was really highly thought of coming out of high school, and he's playing well. And then obviously Trey Weddig, the last 3 or 4 weeks has just, I mean, arguably been their best offensive lineman. He has been outstanding. And then Carter Smith and Kadick have been their usual dependable, good players. So, yeah, I'm not surprised. You just wondered because, that's a lot. That's a position group where it's really about the unit more than the individuals. You got to get those guys playing as a group, and he had to start. First of all, he had to start over with 3 new guys. Then you had to replace one of the guys that you had in there start a fall camp in Kidwell and kind of start over again a little bit. I mean, Bob Bostat's as good as it comes. I mean, he is an outstanding football coach, and he does a great job. And you could see it when he came in last year. They just got better and better as the season went on, and they're getting better and better. As good as they played earlier in the year, they just keep getting better and better, and I think that's going to continue. So, yeah, I would say the 2 lines have been the ones that have surprised me the most,
Yeah.
pleasantly surprised.
Mm. Yeah, and then with Bosa, I know everybody's kind of worried about the coordinators, getting poached after this year, but I would argue that Bostad is just as important retaining this year. Obviously he's stayed pretty loyal at all his stops. He was at Wisconsin for a decade, so and the fact that he wanted to stay at IU with the coaching change says a lot. So even if he did have any ideas of leaving, hopefully Signetti can keep him around just because of the impact he's had on the offensive line so far. The second part of this question, Matt, what group has surprised you the least? This one is pretty easy for me. It's either wide receiver or running back. We knew those rooms would be super deep, super talented, super productive. And neither of those groups have disappointed so far.
Yeah, for me, it's wide receiver. I would say the only surprise about it is I thought Donovan McCauley would be one of the reasons why we wouldn't be surprised by their success. And obviously, not only did he only had a couple catches, he's not with the team and the program anymore. But I'm not surprised by how well they played. They brought in. I mean, you talked about it. We talked about it before. I mean, you mentioned on the board multiple times how much production this group had in their careers coming to Indiana. I mean, it was really eye opening, and it's continued. And they may not be maybe put up the same stats they put up at their previous places because there's so many good. But whenever you throw the ball, Keyshawn Williams has a great game at Northwestern. Miles Cross at UCLA. I mean, other games. I mean, Miles Price has had some big catches. I mean, they've obviously Surratt and Cooper have probably been the two kind of bell cows of that group. But yeah, I'm not surprised by them at all. I would say defensively for me, it's probably been linebacker. I figured, you wondered about the going from one moving up a level, but I really thought, well, after I saw what Aiden Fisher did in the spring game when he was really good, and obviously Walker, I think, was out. He was coming back off an injury, but I mean, he was the more experienced and I guess kind of considered the higher level player of the two. I'm not surprised by what they have done. They both have played great. Like we talked about Jalen Walker a little bit ago after with the injury, but they both have been terrific. And a big part of why this defense has played well so far this year.
Mhm. Yeah, that linebacker group has been just rock solid for Indiana, which yeah was kind of the expectation coming in with those two guys and Brian Haynes as well. All right. On to the next question from JD Gebby. The first one we already answered with Jalen Walker. Doesn't look like he's going to miss any time. He should be back for Nebraska, so that's a good sign. The second question, noon kickoff for Washington, which was announced yesterday. It'll be a noon kickoff on Big Ten Network against Washington the following week after Nebraska, so which means it'll be a 9 a.m. kick on the West Coast. So the question is, how many teams have gone west to east 3 time zones away, played that early? How have they done? It feels like a big advantage. I did write down some notes on this question. There's only been a couple games here where Big Ten games that is where the West Coast teams came east. The first one was Washington at Rutgers. That was on a Friday night, so it wasn't uh, too jarring of a time difference because you do get that night game. But Washington looked pretty bad in that game. Rutgers won it 21-18. UCLA played at Penn State. They lost that game 27-11. UCLA is not a good team this year, but still, that was still a noon kick for them, so that couldn't have been easy. And then this past week, Washington traveled to Iowa and they got their breaks blown off 40-16. And then I looked at Oregon's schedule. It's kind of weird. They literally haven't left the West Coast this year. Oregon hasn't. Their three non-conference games were all either in Oregon or in California. So and then their Big Ten games they haven't left the West Coast yet for those ones either. So the West Coast teams haven't fared too well when they've come over East. I still think that's more fan fodder than anything. I think these teams are ready to play with the time change. I think they're more than equipped to play. It might be a little jarring playing, at a noon kick, but for the most part, I don't really think, and I don't think these coaches would either. I don't think you can kind of use that as an excuse because this is what they signed up for when they joined the Big Ten ultimately. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously a lot easier to go from here to the West Coast because you're I mean, you're gaining basically 3 hours. You know what I mean? So it's not going to affect your. I wouldn't think it would affect your body, your sleep as much when you're coming from the west to the east. It's 3 hours earlier, so everything's moved up 3 hours. To me, I mean, just being both of us, it's much easier to start your day 3 hours later than 3 hours earlier. So, one thing I wonder, I don't know if they've done this. I'm not sure. Part of me wonders if teams might start coming 2 days early, start coming on like a Thursday instead of maybe coming like Thursday evening or Thursday night. And it gives you maybe 24 hours to kind of get used to the time change. Try to get into a time early enough on Thursday where you get your guys up at whatever time you're going to get them up at on Saturday for the local time. I don't know. I mean, I know I was watching the game. They talked about some West Coast teams maybe coming a couple days early. I don't know if Washington or the other teams that have done it are going to do that or have done that. To me, it would be something I think about. Obviously, it's a little bit more expense. You got to get a hotel for a bunch of people for 2 nights, but it may be something they look into. I don't know, especially when you're playing at noon. Maybe if this was a night game, maybe it's not as big of a deal. You still come on Friday, but a noon game, I think, does make it a little bit different, more of a shock to the system. But I think you're right. I mean, to me, I got to believe that, there's been teams that have gone from west to east over the years, maybe not multiple weeks in a row, but or multiple times in the season, but they've done it before. To me, it's, you signed up for it, you should be ready to play. But, I could see maybe trying to come a day early instead of coming on Friday, coming on Thursday to give yourself a little bit of time to adjust.
Yeah, I do wonder, now that Washington has played those two games, away, the one at Rutgers and the one at Iowa, they've lost both and they've looked pretty bad in both those games. So I do wonder if they maybe try to change some things up when they come to Bloomington in a couple weeks, as far as the scheduling goes. But now that they have had those two games on the road, where they have, have had to go on two, three time zones away, that might be a little bit easier of an adjustment for them now that they've done it and they've seen it. I do wonder how, like a team like Oregon's going to do when they, eventually have to come out east because they haven't done it yet this year. And Oregon's a really good team. Just watching that Ohio State game, I mean, you could make a very good argument they're the number one team in the Big Ten right now. So a team like them, when you have that much talent, especially and then as good of a coaching as they have with Dan Lanning, there probably won't be as big of a discrepancy there. Now, some of these other teams like a Washington, like a UCLA, who are sort of trying to find their footing, that's where it could get a little dicey as well. Having to cross those three time zones. But like I keep saying, I mean, this is what you signed up for. You knew what it was going to be. And even if it might be a little bit easier going from east to west, the Big Ten team, the original Big Ten team, still have to do the same thing. So it's the excuses kind of on that front are a little unfounded to me, but I guess we'll ultimately see at the end of the season how it plays out. All right, next question from RBKL. Actually, that's a recruiting question. We'll get to that later on. Um, from Foles G1, your last podcast talked about the high percentage of snaps of our defensive starters. Can you compare that to teams like Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon, and other top programs? Matt, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at this yet. But just, we've talked about this obviously a ton in the past few podcasts, just how many snaps Indiana's defensive starters are playing. And to me, it feels just like compared to the last staff, Tom Allen's staff, who, they rotated a ton. This staff doesn't do that at all, hardly. It feels like sort of an anomaly to me. I don't know if it's the same way to you, but it is just kind of interesting to see how Indiana has operated in that respect so far.
Yeah, and I didn't get real specific on this. Actually, I just looked up Oregon real quick. I my cutoff, now everybody hasn't played the same number of games. Washington's played 7, but my cutoff was kind of 100 snaps. Now, there's a few teams where guys were in the 90s, so I guess I could have included them. But my cutoff was kind of 100 snaps and 16. Okay, so Indiana has played 14 guys at 100 snaps or more. 14 guys are playing at least 38% of the snaps. So the lowest guy is at 38%, the 14th guy. There's multiple guys playing, obviously, quite a bit more than that. Nebraska, who they're playing this week, 17 guys have played 27% of the snaps or more. They're at that's 17 guys at 100 snaps or more. Ohio State, 13 guys at 36%. That surprised me. Now there's probably a few guys for Ohio State that are in the 90s and 80s. So you could probably, if you want to go, you could go down a little bit. Michigan, 17 guys at 26% of the snaps or more. Michigan State, 17 guys at 27% of the snaps or more. Washington, now they played 7 games, but I went down, so I probably could have maybe cut it off like 110 or 120 for them. I did 100. 19 guys at 24% of the snaps. And I just looked up Oregon. They have 16 guys playing 31% of the snaps. So it's not a huge difference. Now, they might, and I could probably maybe dive into this more, but I didn't have time to do it for today. Is what's the drop off between like the 14th guy for Indiana down to the next 3 or 4? What's the drop off for, what I mean? That may be where the difference is. It's the guys at the top end, are they playing, for those schools as much as Indiana? But generally, Indiana's numbers, as far as the guys who are getting the majority, when I say majority, 38% is obviously not majority, but it's, that's those guys that are getting more snaps than everybody else. It's not a whole lot different than the other teams that at least coming up in their schedule. And obviously, they're not playing Oregon, but I threw them in there. I didn't look up Purdue. I'm not sure what it matters how many snaps their guys are playing because none of them are playing any good anyway. But yeah, it's not a whole lot different. I mean, the percentages are a little bit different from, it could be 10 to 12%, but the number of guys playing is not a huge difference. I mean, it's like three, four. Like I said, what Washington was 19, they had the most. But like I said, I probably should have moved their cutoff because they played 7 games, maybe like 120 instead of 100. So I think a lot of teams are doing this. I mean, maybe Indiana's guys at the top end are playing, 5, 10, 15 more snaps than their counterparts. But I don't think it's as big of a difference as maybe I thought, just from, watching it. I think we're just used. Tom Allen really rotated guys. I mean, he played a ton of guys, and there's good and bad to that. If the guys you bring in, the drop off isn't that big, you can do it. But a lot of times the drop off was a little bit significant, and it showed up on the field. And I think sometimes when you play a lot of guys, there can be confusion. It can be hard for guys to kind of get that communication, everything else down. So we'll see. But like I said, I was a little bit surprised that maybe there wasn't a bigger discrepancy between Indiana and some of these other teams.
Yeah, that is surprising. Yeah. I guess kind of looking at it just through the Indiana lens, you can kind of get a little bit uh I guess tunnel vision there, just because of what we've seen and sort of how little Indiana rotates. But yeah, now that we know that kind of these upper echelon teams are doing the same, maybe it's a little bit less jarring. But yeah, like you said, we're kind of a little bit jaded because of how much Tom Allen, like to rotate, especially in the front seven. So some perspective there as well. So to answer your question, uh, Indiana kind of compares almost, evenly with these other teams in terms of percentage of snaps. So not as much as we might have thought. I still would like to see some of the backups and some of the young guys get into the games, especially late in the games when Indiana's pulled away. But I guess for now it's working. Don't change what's not working. So um, there is your answer on that one. All right, next question from Blue Crowned Mott Mott. Any current freshmen that have been particularly impressive to you? Now, this is a tough question because we really haven't seen many freshmen play. Really, the only ones that we've seen play is Mario Landino, Elijah Hardy. We saw Kobe Martin get in, towards the end of those blowout games in the non-con. But those are probably the three, Matt. I don't know if I'm missing anybody in, maybe the secondary or something. I don't think so.
No, I mean, to me, it's the guys who played. It's been Hardy and Landino on defense. I know he's not played a ton on offense. Charlie Becker's the guy that Cignetti has mentioned as being impressive. He's been a regular on special teams. I mean, I know he scored a touchdown against Western Illinois when they ran a little kind of like a wide receiver, handoff, whatever you want to call it. Um, but he's a guy that I think, he's not going to, you don't expect him to play this year at receiver except at mop up time. But I think he's a guy, especially when they lose they're obviously going to lose a number of receivers after the season. He's going to have a shot to be, one of those guys that's in the rotation next year. So, but to me, those would be the most impressive. I mean, I think uh, Austin Liebfried and Demola Ajani. Those are guys going forward. Obviously, this year you don't expect them to play, but going forward, when they lose some linemen, they could definitely be in the mix. They played in some games. It's been mop up time, but those could be guys. If somebody goes down, they may be called upon. Especially Liebfried. He seems to be the guy. He's gotten a little bit more playing time than Ajani. So I don't know if that's on purpose or just the way it worked out. But yeah, it's really been, like I said, Hardy, Landino, Charlie Becker, and hey, Quinn Warren has been terrific as a kickoff guy. And I guarantee you, they did not expect that to happen this year. McCormick got banged or, hurt himself. I think it was Western Illinois. I think he's played since week 2.
Yeah, it's been a while.
But yeah. And Quinn Warren has done a really good job on kickoffs. You really haven't noticed. To me, I haven't noticed. I mean, McCormick was killing the ball. I mean, he was putting it like out of the back of the end zone. And Warren may not be doing that, but he's not hurt the special teams. Let's put it that way. He's not been a liability as the kickoff guy. So those are the guys that, as far as the freshmen, I mean, we're not at practice. You don't get a ton of insight about how guys are looking. But those are the guys I would say are kind of that have stood out to me. And also Daniel Ndukwe blocked the punt against Maryland, and I think he's a guy that next year you lose Linnell Carr. He's a guy that could definitely be in that kind of stud position on the defensive end, on the edge there. So he's another guy that, I mean, he looked on that play. He looked athletic. I was standing in the back of the end zone. I was 20 feet away from the block, And you could see him coming through and fighting through, and then having the athleticism to make the play. So those are the guys that, off the top of my head, kind of have stood out.
Yeah, one guy too that I think a lot of are forgetting about that he's still a freshman, well, redshirt freshman, but Nico Radicic. We didn't see him kick a whole lot last year, and he's really done a good job this year. Now, granted, he's only had to take mostly extra points because of how successful Indiana's offense has been. But I don't think he's missed a kick this year. He's made all of his field goals. So to see him come along, especially with McCormick going down as long as he has been down, for Radishes to come in and really kind of take hold of that starting kicker job, that the place kicking job, that's been good to see as well. Because we're kind of wondering, this offseason, former 5-star kid, All American, is he gonna, finally break through? And to see him finally do it this year has been a pleasant surprise for the special teams.
Yeah, and for all intents and purposes, he's kind of still a freshman, a true freshman. I mean, because he was so he was injured and really didn't do much anything of last year. So yeah, he's been great. He's been obviously nails on the extra points and then the field goals. He had some the conditions weren't the best for a kicker up in Northwestern, and his kick look on TV they look great.
Next question here is from IUAMB40. The portal will obviously be key to IU's roster next season. Do you think Signetti scours more power teams or group of five sectors, or maybe dips into more FCS? I feel like his production over potential approach has really proven itself this season. I think with how successful Indiana's been going out in the portal, and now that they have tangible evidence, tangible results of these group of five guys coming up and being able to make an instant impact, be productive. I think coupled with Indiana's success this season, obviously, I think they'll have more options from power teams, power transfers, than they maybe would have last offseason. I think the pickings will at least be more broad. But like we said, Signetti loves his production over potential. So it could be a thing where he sticks to what he knows best, which is let's go get these lower level guys, and we can we have the the results on paper to show them. Okay, this is what you can do if you come to Indiana. So I do wonder maybe if he sticks with the same approach where he goes down, goes to the Sun Belt, goes to the MAC, and gets the best transfers from those conferences, and kind of sticks with it. But you'd have to imagine too that they're gonna have more opportunities at least to get those power transfers that are coveted by other power schools as well.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I don't think he's going to change on is guys who have proven track records as players. Maybe the exception, and this is just me guessing. Maybe there's a guy that they recruited when they were James Madison, and maybe he's at somewhere, and they really liked him, and he went to a bigger school. That might be a guy where there was a guy they really liked, and they would take. But I think Signetti said, I can't remember. He said recently where he said, I operate best when like I'm kind of overlooked or chip on my shoulder. I think he's going to look for guys like that. I mean, it could open up more avenues to Power Five players who have the production that he's looking for. But if he feels like they don't fit culture wise, he's not going to take them. And if he feels like these guys are, they're going to come in and kind of big time the program, like, hey, I came from, XYZ program, I need to be, pampered and all this. I mean, that's not going to work. I think that's one reason why he likes these guys from JMU and Old Dominion and some of these guys. They were overlooked out of high school, and they've had to work really hard to become the players they've become. And I think he likes that. It doesn't mean he wouldn't take Power Five guys. He's taking Power Five guys. I mean, you see Keyshawn Williams, Elijah Green. I mean, there's Power Five guys. Trey Weddick. There's Power Five guys on this team. But I think the most important thing for him after production is going to be that guy's personality. Does he fit with what he's looking for in a player? And if he comes from an Alabama or I don't know, name a big school, whatever it may be, is that guy going to fit as well as a guy from a James Madison or another mid-major type program? So I mean, my thing is, I'd say to fans, do you want him to change? I mean, I know it's one season, but he's been doing this, and it was working at James Madison. They had 3 or 4 different quarterbacks that were one-year guys, and they all won Player of the Year under these guys. So they know what they're doing, they know what they're looking for. But I would say the personality and the makeup of the player is just as important as his talent and where he's from.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And that's something I've been thinking about too, just the way they embody Signetti these transfers have this year, sort of playing with that chip on their shoulder. And even the guys that have come from the Power Five schools, right? Like a lot of them were sort of written off and cast off as, maybe they're not good enough to play at this level, or for whatever reason they lost out on whatever, workload they had at the previous schools. I mean, Justice Ellison, he had a terrific 2022 at Wake Forest. Last year kind of fell off a little bit. So like a guy like that you have to figure has a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. And the other thing too with this staff and I don't know if maybe this is just a 1 year thing or this is how they're going to operate going forward, but it looked like, just based on how they kind of picked their transfers was the skill positions, they placed a lot of premium on talent there because you can't teach talent, right? It's, that's just God-given gifts there. So they went out to the Power Five and got those, kind of filled those skill positions with Power Five guys, the kind of talent you can't really find at the lower levels. And then, you fill in the rest, linebacker, D line, secondary. You can kind of coach those guys up, even if they may not be the most talented. You can kind of reach into the group of five schools, the FCS schools, and coach those guys up. And then at the skill positions, right? You at the end of the day, you just need talent at the skill positions, athleticism to ultimately compete in the Big Ten. So I do wonder though if that's going to kind of stick, or maybe who knows? Maybe Cincinnati goes out and finds some wide receiver from the Group of Five school and he pops off like Elijah Surratt. But that's kind of the philosophy I've seen from this staff so far. I don't know if that's going to continue. I don't know if you have any insight into that, Matt.
No, I mean, I think, like you mentioned, Miles Price from Texas Tech, um, Surratt's from was an FCS guy. It was a James Madison, but started at the FCS. You got Miles Cross from Ohio. I mean, I think you evaluate the film and you try, and it's tough when you're dealing with mid-major and especially FCS guys because FCS guy may play one or two games, um, maybe in his career. You might get a school that plays one or two against a team in one season, but there's not a whole lot of tape to go on, so you got to kind of look at that. But I mean, this is where you tap into the network of people somebody along the way that you have a relationship with. You hope it knows something about this guy. I mean, you can kind of see the talent on film. Like I said, to me, the biggest thing with him is, and you can see it. One of the biggest reasons why this program is doing so well this year. Obviously, Signetti's staff have done a tremendous job. There is great leadership on this team. Like you don't have to be in the locker room to see that. And I think a lot of it is, and it'll be interesting going forward because you're not going to be able to bring in 13 JMU guys, I wouldn't think, for 2025. But, I think they've laid a foundation with the guys they brought in that the guys who are coming back next year, you should be able to sprinkle in some new players from the portal. And, you won't need those guys to come in and be leaders. They'll just kind of come in and pick up, where everybody else left off instead of having to kind of take the bull by the horns, so to speak, themselves. So, but I mean, I think like I said, I think there will be more Power Five players or Power Four, I guess it is now, Power Four players available to them, and I think they'll go after some of those guys. Like I said, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's some dude from Georgia and everybody's like, well, they should go after him. I'm just throwing out Georgia, and there's a guy from a mid-major school in Indiana that goes harder after that guy because they feel like he fits better. I'm not saying that will happen, but it would not shock me at all if that does happen at any position in the portal. Going forward. The other thing is if they don't get, we'll get to this. I know somebody's asked about Julian Lewis. If they don't get Julian Lewis, who do they look at? Because I think it's going to be a portal quarterback. And what are they looking for? Is it an experienced guy like Ward? Is it a guy that's maybe kind of in between Taven Jackson and what they already have? I don't know. It'll be interesting to see kind of how they go. Somebody who can push Taven Jackson and compete with him. That's my guess. But I don't know. It'll be interesting. The portal recruiting for Indiana this year is going to be really interesting because it's going to be totally different from last year because they've had way much more time to do it, and they're not going to have a bunch of JMU guys to bring with them.
Yeah. Yeah, especially that quarterback position. That's going to be, really fascinating to see how that ultimately plays out. But we still have a whole season to go, so we'll cross that bridge when we get there. This next question is from I Quit 2023. He says, the biggest eye opener for me was a group of five players we brought in as transfers were as a whole better than IU's players from last year. What have been your biggest eye openers as the season has progressed? I don't know if he's talking about transfers, but assuming he is, yeah, for me I think it's Mikael Kamara. He put up big numbers last year at JMU, but to be a defensive end to go from the group of five level to the Big Ten is a huge step up. and for him to be playing as many snaps as he has, and I think he might still be leading the nation in pressures this year, at least the Big Ten. For him to make as big of an impact as he has off the edge and really not miss a beat from where he came from last year at JMU has been, a huge surprise for me. A good surprise, but just a surprise nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, this may surprise people a little bit. Curtis Rourke, I thought he would be good. I did not think it never in my wildest dreams, I think he would be this good. I mean, he's playing like a guy. Now it's 6 games. We keep saying this. There's still 6 more games. He's playing like a guy that at the end of the year should be in New York when they do the Heisman. I'm not saying he should win the Heisman, but he should be a guy that is at that presentation because he's playing that good. I mean, he is one of the 3 or 4 best quarterbacks, not in the Big Ten, in the country right now. The level of play has been spectacular. I mean, not every throw has been great. Obviously, he had a couple interceptions against Maryland. There's been some other throws here or there, but overall, this guy has been. I mean, I guarantee you, the staff. I have to think the staff would even admit he's been better than what we even had hoped he would be. He is exactly what they needed. An older guy, but he's been incredibly productive. Such a great, calm, poised demeanor on the field. I mean, even we were watching him after the Maryland interceptions. Never upset. Went over, talked to Cincinnati, sat down. They went over what happened. He went back on the field and then just tore him up. So, I mean, while I thought he was going to be good, he's playing at a whole different level than I anticipated. And then the running backs, I thought they had a chance to be good, but Tyson Lawton and Justin Ellison have been really, and Kalon Black when he's got his chance, and even Elijah Green, they have been. And I thought they would be good, but you just always kind of wonder about how that's going to translate. I've told you before, and I'll say it off the. I mean, Tyson Law's one of my favorite IU players that I've covered. He is so much fun to watch. There's a guy that started in a nowhere school. I know he's whatever 24, 25 years old. He runs like every carry is the last carry he's ever going to get in football, and I just really have a ton of respect for the way he plays the game.
Hmm. Yeah, no, those are two good shout outs as well. Uh, the second question here is who has bigger guns, Jared or James Evans?
I'm going with Jared.
I'll give James Evans that one. If James Evans wants to come onto our podcast one time, we can maybe we could test that out, but we'll leave that for the offseason. Next question from IU Fanatic is Jacob Megan for our second team defensive end behind Mikel Kamara. We don't know because we don't get a depth chart. Haven't got a depth chart all year. Probably won't get a depth chart all year. But you can kind of read the writing on the wall. JMF hasn't really played at all this year, so over guys like Mario Landino, who's kind of slid over to that second team defensive end spot. If we were making a depth chart right now, I would say he's probably not second team defensive end, but if someone gets hurt, Linnell Carr, Kamara, one of those guys, he could end up sliding up a bit, but we haven't seen him at all this year, and we've talked about this before. So,
Yeah, I agree. My guess is, I mean, just from what we've seen, I would say he is not. I'm not really sure who second team is behind Kamara. I'm with you. I probably would say Landino. I might even say Sneed before Mangum Farrar, but that's just a guess. I honestly don't know, but I don't think it's. I mean, if Jacob Mangum Farrar was second team, you would think he'd at least get a handful. Maybe I mean, I know Kamara basically doesn't come off the field, but maybe when he did come off the field, he's never come in. Mangum Farrar, that is. So yeah, I don't think he's second team behind Kamara.
no, yeah. Every time I've seen him on the sidelines here, he's holding his helmet. So it doesn't at least it doesn't appear that he's in the up there in the pecking order for snaps right now. But that's a different conversation for another day. We talked about that a lot last week. So definitely an interesting development there for Indiana. Next one from Kookie is have you heard how Indiana tries to keep tabs on the temperature of the players currently on the roster? In today's day and age, if you're a freshman, you're not playing, you might have lots of family and friends pushing you to the portal. How do you try to address that? Uh, there's probably not a whole lot. Even if we did know, we probably couldn't say it. But kind of how we've seen Cignetti run this program. He doesn't get caught up in stuff like that, especially in season. He's not worrying about who's going to the portal after this year. Now, obviously, that is something that you do have to manage because that can happen at any time. We saw with Donovan McCauley, we saw with those 6 other players who transferred out. But at this point in the season, in how well Indiana is playing, I would be shocked if that's at the top of Kurt Cignetti's mind. And if you do have to convince a guy to stay and you want him to stay, really all you have to do is show them the wins, right? I mean, you put in the work, you'll play a lot of snaps, you'll win a lot of games if you stay at Indiana. And that would be kind of the message that I see Signetti sending. But I don't think he's going to get too wrapped up in a thing like this right at this point in the season.
No, and I mean, I'm sure the assistants, I'm sure they have to do some recruiting of their current players, their own players, and there's guys you obviously you don't want to lose, but I mean, I think they've shown if you stay in Indiana, you work hard, you're gonna play, you're gonna be successful, you're gonna be productive, and you're gonna win games. And obviously now you're gonna be playing national TV games against some of the best teams in the country. So, I don't like I said, I to me, I don't think Signetti is somebody that loses a whole bunch of sleep. Not that he gets a lot of sleep anyways, but I don't think he loses much sleep over stuff like that. I think he's going to run his program, and that's why I think it's so important that the guys they get in the portal. And like Elvis, I mean, you've had guys leave already. They brought in the portal. When you bring in 30 guys, not everybody's going to be happy. It's just impossible. And I don't. I get why. So we talked about it a couple weeks ago. I get why some of these guys leave. I don't necessarily agree with how they're doing it, but I get it because their college career is coming to an end, and this is it for them. But for the most part, they've been. We only have one class to judge them on, but they've done a great job in the portal. The guys that left after last season, you can't put that on them. They didn't know Kurt Cinetti. I don't blame those dudes for jumping in the portal. If you're an Indiana player, I'm not sure where you're going to go when you've been as poor as they've been, but they felt like they needed to go somewhere else, and so be it. So, I think they're probably doing what a lot of programs do. You're recruiting your guys, you're showing them what's the benefits of staying in Indiana and how it can help you as a person off the field as well as on the field.
Yeah. And yeah, like you said, the players that Signetti recruits, you have to believe that a lot of them understand that, you might not play right away, but you're going to be part of a winning program. And, eventually down the line, you will play a lot of snaps if you, just kind of stick with it. So it's pretty easy to kind of sell that as well. So there were a few strength and conditioning questions here on the board, Matt, that I don't know how much we can get into here just because we don't know a whole lot. But just sort of the way these guys, have looked this offseason, their kind of body transformations, it does look like, they have placed a premium on sort of getting leaner and faster, which, obviously is the staples of the Signetti sort of system. I don't, the strength and conditioning question, we don't, obviously we're not there in the weight room, so we can't really speak to it, but I don't know if you had anything, Matt, on just sort of how they're going about it this year compared to previous years.
No, not really. I mean, I think with Aaron Wellman, I think it was, maybe the individual was relied on more to do some stuff on their own, and that's kind of where he came from at the NFL. I mean, but as far as specific things, I don't know. We have not seen the team. In the past, they occasionally let us come in and watch a workout session. We've not seen that since Signetti's come in, and really, we hadn't seen it the last. I don't know if we ever saw it under Wellman. We did see it, I think, under Blue, but I'm not sure we ever saw it under Wellman. I can't remember. But so we haven't been down the weight room for that kind of thing in a number of years. So I don't really, I can't really comment on the difference. But obviously, there's a difference because you can see it physically in these guys. Whatever they're doing is working. So, but as far as the actual nuts and bolts and ins and outs of what's changed, I'm not sure.
Yeah. All right, let's get into some recruiting questions here to end us off. This one is from RBKL. Any general reactions to recruits seeing IU play the way they do? Is there going to be any real payoff in that area soon? The 2025 class, we've already seen what do they got? 20 commits now. Now, obviously, they lost Byron Baldwin, which was a tough pill to swallow just because of he was obviously the 4-star, the top ranked guy in the class. But you're already seeing the buy-in, with a lot of these recruits, and they've stuck to their commitments. So, Matt, you're obviously the recruiting guy. Have you heard of any, from any recruits about, their sort of reaction to Indiana start this year?
Well, I mean, obviously the guys are committed and guys who visited are excited about what they're doing. I will say this on Byron Baldwin. That's not over. I thought it was, but it's not. I think they still have a shot to bring him back, which is unusual because usually when a guy decommits, it's usually over. I think if we're going to see a payoff for how this season's going, you'll see it more in 26 because the 25 class is all but done. And the guys that they're still in on, they've been in on for a while. Now they've got in on a few new, Benny Patterson from down in southern Indiana, Newbert, which is a little small town just north of Evansville, Castle High School. It's actually had some pretty good basketball players come out there. Not really a ton of football guys, but he's kind of blown up. But I mean, Julian Lewis, Winnie Watkins, those are kind of the guys that they've been after. And if there's any other guys, that are probably guys that they've been recruiting for some time instead of new guys. Like I said, there may be a guy or two in there, but for the most part, I think it'll be guys they've been after. But if you're going to see a payoff, I think it's going to be more in 26. And again, I think they're going to take guys that they like, regardless of what the rankings are, and regardless of maybe what other schools are after. Now they'll go after. I mean, they're going to go after really good players. Julian Lewis is one of the top best players in the country, but they're also going to recruit like Dontre Henderson. It's a guy that they recruited at JMU, didn't have a ton of attention, like from big schools, and we've already seen him get on the field a little bit this year. And I think he's a guy that going forward is going to be one of their kind of go-to guys in the defensive backfield. So if the recruiting should increase. I know fans look at ratings and all that. The coaches look at the tape and they look at who fits their program, and that's not going to change going forward.
That gets into another question here from Hoosier Ash. Any insight into the recruiting prospects for 2026? Any players that you feel IU might lead for right now?
I mean, I'm starting to hit up 2026 guys. It's hard to say if they lead for anybody because I mean, they've had some 2026 guys obviously on campus. A couple guys. I mean, Brooks Goodman he's a quarterback from Blessed Trinity Catholic in Roswell, Georgia. He was here earlier this season. I know IU went down to see him on Friday. Sinceri was down in Georgia. I believe that's who went to see him. Anthony Colner from Carmel, up here in my neck of the woods. He's been down at least once, and he's got an offer. I don't know if they lead for those guys, but I would say those are a couple guys. Oh, I mean, I'm trying to think. Kamari Farmer he's a running back from Carrollton, Julian Lewis' school. He's high on him. It's so early. I don't know that there's anybody say they lead for it. Now, if they got to commit from a 2026 guy next week, I wouldn't be shocked by it, but it would probably surprise me a little bit just because I don't know of anybody right now that's getting ready to pop that they could be close to. Control Webb, the edge guy, is a guy that they're in good shape with. I think he's announcing next month. He's going to drop his top 10 for whatever that's worth. I mean, come on. I'm not going to get worked up about 10 schools. But right now they're in great shape. I think with a number of guys, I just don't know. I can sit here and say that they're the number one school for anybody in particular.
And then the last question that is always at the top of everybody's mind until this whole saga is over is obviously Julian Lewis. He took a USC visit last week, which he's still committed to USC at this point. We've seen the stories from Tom Loy. He still thinks that Indiana has a chance to flip Julian Lewis. Like you said, Tino Sinceri was down there during the bye week to visit with him. Do you think he makes an appearance in Bloomington at some point this season, or just sort of what are your vibes are on that recruitment as far as right now?
Well, they're working hard to get him on campus for a game. That's for sure. I don't know when it'll be and if it will happen. I have no idea. I've the visitor list for this weekend I'm still working on, so I don't know. Right now, I don't have him as a visitor for this weekend, but that doesn't mean he's not going to be. There's a lot of guys that I don't know about for this weekend yet. It's early in the week. It's only Tuesday. But I mean, if they can get him on campus, I think that really gives them a shot. I mean, they already have a shot, but I'm saying, I think you hit a little bit of a lull. He visited back in May or June, whenever it was, late May, early June, and then you obviously hit a lull. And he has playing great. USC's been a little bit up and down. I think Auburn getting Deuce Knight makes the path to getting Julian Lewis to Indiana a lot easier. I think if they don't get him, then that puts another school there that has the NIL, and they're close to home. I mean, obviously Auburn's close to where he's from. It's just across the border because I think Carrollton's over there on the Alabama state line. So I don't know if he's going to visit. I know they're trying like crazy, and I know that they like the relationship they have with him and his family. It's just, trying to get him on campus, figure out that weekend where you can. I remember he's still playing too. So it's tough to come from Georgia to Indiana, especially if the game's earlier in the day. But if they can, then, I think I'm not predicting like Tom Loy's is going to Indiana, but I think it will be tough for him to say no if they can get him on campus and get him, especially you get him up, say, like the Michigan game, and it's a sellout and you play well, you look good. I think it's going to be tough. I think it's going to be tough for him to say no to IU because of everything they've got going on in the relationship he has with Tino Sinceri. But the question is, can you get him up here for one of those games?
Yeah. Do you feel like, because obviously we've been hearing about Julian Lewis for what, 6, 8 months now. Do you feel like as, time keeps going on and we don't get a flip, or at least, more whispers of a flip, Do you feel like he's probably more solid with his USC commitment right now, or do you think it's still up in the air?
Yeah, to me, I've always felt like when a guy is entertaining other schools and but they remain committed to their school, the longer it goes, I think it's better for the school because they have that relationship. The other thing I wonder is when's the next bye week? Middle of November, like I think it's the weekend of the 16th. I mean, listen, they want Julian Lewis, but Kirsignetti is not going to keep playing footsie for forever. At some point, he's going to be like, listen, you need to, for lack of a better word, crap or get off the pot and either let us know what you're doing or we're going to move on. I'm not saying that's the date. I just wonder that's towards the end of the season. You have a couple weeks left, and there's not going to be. You're probably not going to know who's in the portal yet as far as quarterbacks at that point. But you're going to start preparing for what you're going to do. Because you're only going to have a few weeks in the portal. In a couple weeks, the portal's going to open. A couple weeks after that, and you got to be ready to go. So to me, I think by that time, I think you need to have some kind of an answer before you get to Thanksgiving. So Indiana knows what they need to do when they're coming out at the end of the season and the portal opens back up. And you got to either go get a quarterback from there or it's Julian Lewis. So it'll be interesting. I think I would hope that there will be some closure one way or another here in the next month.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The questions probably won't stop until then, but we'll see. This is my own question for you, Matt, and this is something I know you've talked about on the board, a couple times. But just with recruiting, and obviously every staff has their own way of doing things. This staff is one of those ones where if you're committed, you're committed. They don't like you taking really other visits to other schools. Is that sort of a departure from what you've seen in the past, how other staffs have operated with recruits and commits?
A little bit. I mean, I know. Here's the thing on that. I mean, we're talking about Chris McCorkle, who decommitted. I mean, let's be honest. Some of the reason why they moved on is because they saw some of his film from the summertime in 7-on-7, and they weren't all that impressed. He didn't look great. Now he may turn out to be a great player. Kansas took him, and they've done a great job over there. Turning that program around. Byron Baldwin decommitted. They would take him back. Okay, I'm thinking of if Davion Chandler decided to kind of like entertain other schools, I think they would probably try to hold on to. How they feel about the player comes into play. I was done this for years. I was told guys, if you commit here and you take an official visit somewhere else, we're pulling your offer. Now, is that a hard and fast? Is it black and white? No, I said on the board, there's a lot of gray here. I mean, if it's a kid from Iowa City who's really like a 4 or 5 star kid, you're probably going to be a little bit more flexible than you would with maybe another guy. So, everybody talks about, well, it's hypocrisy for Signetti to recruit other players, but not. No, it's not. He didn't make a pledge to not recruit other players. If he's not recruiting guys, if he's not recruiting Julian Lewis and Julian Lewis is interested in Indiana, he's not doing his job. He's negligent in his job. There was no pledge made to all the other programs in the country. Oh, we're not going to recruit your players. No, but that kid did make a commitment to your staff. And if you tell him, hey, we're taking 3 cornerbacks or we're taking 2 linebackers or whatever it may be, and he's one of your guys, and you shut down recruiting pretty much for that position and start focusing on maybe the next class, and he decommits, it puts you in a bad spot. I think it's the reason why a lot of schools kind of have that policy. Hey, we only had so many spots for this position. You took one of them. We expect you to uphold that. And I think that's why coaches do that. And it's not the same as a coach went out and recruiting committed players from another school, because it's not. Now, if he tells the kid we're taking 3 safeties and you go out and recruit a 4th or a 5th safety, then yeah, that is hypocrisy, because you told him we're only taking this many, and now you're going above and beyond what you said you're going to do, and that to me is hypocritical. But recruiting other players, committed players, and telling your guys that you don't want them visiting other schools, it's not the same thing. It's apples and oranges. I know people think it's the same. It's not the same. And every coach in the country has to do that. If you're not recruiting guys, it doesn't matter if they're committed or not, that are interested in your school, that can help you win, you're not doing your job. Simple as that.
Mic drop. That's why they call Matt Weaver the best recruiting guy in the business. All right, Matt. That will wrap it up for the mailbag here. Indiana hosts Nebraska this weekend on a homecoming big noon kickoff. Will be there, as well as the pregame show. Matt and I will be there for Peegs.com live coverage throughout the week. We hope you folks enjoy the podcast questions. Like we said, if you guys ever want to interact with us over on Peegs.com, feel free to come over to the football board, ask us questions, and we will be there as well. But for now, Matt Weaver, Jared Kelly. We'll see you folks over on the site as we have coverage going into homecoming weekend.